We acknowledge the lands of the traditional custodians across Australia. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' continuing connection to land, water and sky country. We acknowledge the wine regions and hundreds of different nations around this continent, and the ancient soils on which we stand and grow. From the Wadani saltwater peoples of the Margaret River in our west, to the East Coast Sunrise people of the Yuin Nation, and the Southern Island and Saltbush peoples of the Nioni peoples of Tasmania. Today and always, we pay our deep respects to the custodians, those who went before and those who will follow, as the knowledge holders of tomorrow. This is Australia.
Hello guys, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from today. My name's Bert and I'm in London, and I'm very proud to say we're hosting this Orange region wine tasting today. We're gonna beam into Orange later on, and we're gonna chat with some fantastic winemakers there. Just before we get started, I just want to cover a little bit of housekeeping. So you've got 3 tabs on your right-hand side of your screen here. You've got chat, Q&A, and handouts. Now, chat is obviously just for general chat. Use it as you like, just to say hello. But Q&A, that's the really, really important section. I'd really love to make this session as interactive as possible. So any questions that come up on the screen, I'm going to try and relay to the guys in Orange. If I can't, and we don't get around to it and run out of time, we'll send the questions to them as a follow-up, and we'll do our best to get back to you, but we'll try and answer every single question. We'll try and answer as many as possible today. But it's a really great, unique experience to talk to 3 legends of Orange live. So please put as many questions as you can in there. Ask them as many difficult questions as you like, and we'll try and answer as many as possible today. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We've got, like I say, 3 legends. We've got Ben Crossing of Angullong. We've got Damien Shaw of Philip Shaw Wines. And we've got Peter Robson of Ross Hill Wines all tuning in today. There we are. Live from Orange.
Hey guys.
Good evening. How are you all?
Yeah, great. Very good. Thank you.
Good stuff. So I was lucky enough to visit Orange a couple of months ago. I did a fantastic tour of New South Wales, and we drove west of Sydney up to Orange, and it was an eye-opening visit. I've known about Orange for a long time, but I was surprised about the amount of people in the UK that don't know about Orange and don't know about the wines, which hopefully we're going to change by the end of this session. But what I was fascinated by is obviously it's Australia's highest region. So vineyards start at 600 meters above sea level, and the highest we got up to, because I checked on my phone, was 1,300 meters above sea level, which is incredible and isn't what you think about when you think about Australian wines. So we're going to focus on the diversity here that we have in Orange. So yeah, it's fabulous, and actually you have to be above 600 meters above sea level to actually be part of the GI in general. So obviously you have very cool nights, and the temperature is all related to the altitude, which means you get some truly unique and wonderful wines growing in this region. So in terms of size, Orange is 3.5 kilometers squared in size, and there's just over 1,000 hectares under vine as well. It was pioneers such as John Hicks, who established a lot of the first vineyards in the region. And then the gentleman that you've got on your screen today is 3 of the ones that actually brought it to the forefront and made these wines famous around the world, not just in Australia as well. So when we drove up to Orange, we drove from Sydney, and Sydney was, I mean, it was warmer than it is in England today, and it's supposed to be summer. So it was around about 25 degrees in Sydney. As you get those beautiful mornings on the Sydney Harbour, with the harbour gleaming. It was incredible. And I thought, oh no, I've packed all my winter clothes. I'm not going to need any of these. And then we drove up to Orange, which was about 3.5, 4-hour drive through some amazing scenery and windy roads, mountain roads. And we went to the town of Orange, and we visited the first winery, and they had the fire on. It was raining, and I had put all my layers on at that point, and it felt very much like being at home or in Manchester, where I used to live, where we have a lot of rain, which was not what I was expecting from an Australian New South Wales vineyard. But it just goes to show the diversity that the guys have here. And we're going to explore that today. We're going to taste different wines and contrasting styles and different winemaking techniques. So I'd just like, at this point, to hand over to Damien of Philip Shaw Wines to lead the acknowledgement of the Indigenous people of the region.
Thanks, Bert. I begin today by acknowledging the Wiradjuri people, traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to the elders, past and present. I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So, guys, yeah, we're gonna kick off now. We're gonna talk to all the winemakers. We're gonna be tasting wines as we go along and chatting a little bit about the wines. But please, please, please use the Q&A. Ask as many questions as possible. And I really want to make this chat as interactive as possible. I know a lot of you have dialed into the call today, which is amazing to see. So yeah, please ask as many questions as possible, and I will relay those to the guys. And it's a really unique experience to get something going backwards and forwards as well. So Damien, we're going to kick off with yourself, starting at Philip Shaw Wines. When I was in New South Wales, we visited, I think it was close to 25 wineries in 10 days. And I'm not just saying this, Philip Shaw was one of my standouts from the visit. I was blown away by Dan's enthusiasm, his passion, and the latest vintages that we tasted in tank, some of which were still fermenting away, and other bits were in tank and barrel, just absolutely blew me away. The purity of the fruit and the quality of the wines and the direction that the wines are going in, it's phenomenal. And we were lucky enough to try some 2012 Chardonnay during dinner as well. So seeing the evolution of the wines as well is really, really special. And it's an experience that I remember for a very long time. So we're going to kick off now with your first wine. So this is here, the 2021. This is the Architect Chardonnay. I'm just going to position the screen. Everything's in reverse. There we go. So we're going to start by drinking this wine, which I've got in my glass here. But could you start by introducing the winery? Obviously, it's a family-run winery with Dan and Philip as well. Can you introduce a little bit about the winery and why you guys settled in Orange?
Yeah, well, yeah, we are like Mum and Dad, Philip and Daniel and I. Daniel is the winemaker who you hung out with and went through the winery, and I've got the Architect Chardonnay sitting in front of us now, and big part of why 30 odd years ago, 40 years ago, our weekends were spent driving around Australia, basically when Dad was running Rosemount looking for the best place to grow grapes. In this country, it was a 5-year journey, and we looked up all over Australia, sitting in the back of hire cars with soil maps, and we ended up in Orange. We planted 88, 89, so 30 odd years ago, and where we are now in the cellar door is a 130-year-old bluestone barn that we're sitting behind. So Orange is defined by basically Mount Canobolas. So you can go 30 k's that way towards Bend, you can go 30 k's that way, and that's sort of the outer part of the region. And just not far from where we are now is Mount Canobolas, which sits at 1,400 metres. So why are we here? We're here because of the altitude and the coolness, and because of Mount Canobolas. We're sitting in the middle of a massive big food basket. Next door are cherries and apples. Over there on Pete's place used to be a snail farm, and you got some of the best lamb and beef and produce that comes out. Obviously a lot of it just goes into Sydney, but Sydney's been grabbing food out of our backyard for over 100 years. It's only been in the last 30, 40 years that people like Stephen Doyle and Murray at Canobola Smith, planted vineyards here. And so originally, like most great regions around the world, it's been the food that sort of brought a lot of people here. And we've landed here on in Orange with the food and the wine. And that's what brought us here.
Amazing. We've already had a first question, which is great, from Hannah Orgate. She says, the wine's only 12% ABV. How can that be achieved? And I guess it's this unique, cool, high altitude climate, right?
Yeah, so we have coolness, but we also have elevation. So the coolness brings our ability to maintain natural acidity in all the wines, but also the altitude and the intensity of the sunlight. When you're at the snow, your backside burns quicker than it does when you're sitting on the beach. And the same thing is that intensity of sunlight drives our ability to get these wines right, but with good flavour intensity. Essentially, you're seeing that there at 12, 13. That's where all our whites are. 11.5 to 12.5 of the whites, 12 to 13 of the reds. And you look at 19 as a vintage, it was a cracking year. It was the back end of what we had was a drought period, and it was sort of the last year, so it was a relatively small vintage. And Chardonnay is, to me, and the boys next to me, may have read it differently, but I see it as the backbone of our region, and it's something that expresses the soil, the terroir, very well. And, I think it does in most regions, but, lean, this wine spends 6 to 7 months in barrel, older barrels, 1 to 2 year old, 100% French, a lot of solids contact, 100% native ferment. And then we're basically adding a little bit of sulfur on bottling. So it's really lovely and lean and tight. We're doing 10 passes in the vineyard by hand. So, what we do in the vineyard's probably the most important part of, I guess, viticulture and the side before, I guess, the baton gets handed Daniel and his team. So, Courmayeur now is just over 30 years. So we've got some great vine age. We've got 9 clones of Chardonnay sitting on Courmayeur, which is, an incredible resource to have. And yeah, the clones change each year, but as much as they change, they don't change. But yeah, I see Chardonnay, across the three of us as, incredibly important, and to all the other winemakers in this region. And I think you see a really distinct style. And it's, I guess, in a way, what differentiates Orange is that coolness. It's the coolness driven by elevation.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And I guess having a winery in Orange, obviously you have a lot of freedom in Australia in general, but in Orange especially, because it's still establishing, and I counted a lot of different grape varieties and a lot of different winemaking styles. And it seems like a really exciting time in Orange in general as well. There's a lot of exciting things happening and people trying out new grapes and different plots and things as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, so what makes a really great wine region is, to start with, is you've got to have the viticulture right. So getting, great viticulturists into the region over the last 30, 40 years has been really important. And then it's great winemaking. And, the diversity of winemaking, we've got 30 wineries now. And you got the old dogs still in the wineries, got the young ones coming through. And, all these winemakers have been all over the world, and they're here in Orange using the awesome resource that we've got in our backyard, and they get to play with it with this amazing produce.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I think, with Chardonnay, I think, Damien, what you're saying there is spot on. It's variety that really tells a story for Orange with the change in altitude. So where we are, where our vineyards are, down on that 600 metre level that you talked about, up to vineyards up at 800 metres, 900 metres, those different altitudes, you're getting the different flavour profiles, but they still are these cool climate wines with that typical cool climate structure. And moderate alcohols and really deliver fantastic, great flavour profile. So we're really Chardonnay is one of those varieties I think we all get pretty excited about, really.
Great. Well, that leads us nicely onto another Chardonnay here. Really difficult to hold it up when everything's in reverse.
Oh, okay. I'll hold it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're looking at Chardonnay here. Everyone can see that on the screen there.
Yeah.
So, Peter, could you talk us through this wine, please? This is the
Maybe picking up on your earlier question, Damien, just let me tell you how we got here. Very different story to Damien's. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I've had various jobs all over the place, and my wife was born in Orange. There's a funny thing that happens with Orange people. They all come back. I don't know why. When they're born here, they all came back. And I recall I was about 54, and my wife walked into our house in Sydney, and she said, well, I'm going home. And I said, well, what do you mean you're going home? This is home. She said, no, Orange, home. You can come if you want to. And that's how we started. That's how we started Ross Hill. And so off we went. And what do? Well, as Damien said, the viticulture industry was just really starting to boom. That's back in '94. And we planted our first vineyard. We made our first wine in '99, 400 cases. Pretty average. You might have becks at night, if you'd had a few glasses. But things have changed a lot in the Orange region since then. Just a couple of other things about the district. Damien's got it pretty right. I think the other thing is soil types here, which are really significant. So Mount Canolbus had 3 big lava flows, and they produced some wonderful soils, which were recognised in the very early settlement in Australia, back in 1850. People start to settle here on these lovely soils, growing apples, pears, all sorts of things. And then the soils only sort of, they went south, but they really just finished at the township of Orange. So beyond that, where our first vineyard was, they're very old basalt rock, essentially. You go down, and where the Chardonnay comes from is an easterly facing block on maybe 2 to 3 foot topsoil into basalt floaters and then straight into basalt rock. It's always been a performing vineyard for us. Damien got it right about 2019. It was one of those great years. And this Chardonnay's done extremely well, as you know. I think the other thing, just picking up what Ben said, one of the things that Orange has been able to pick up on Chardonnay is that Australia, I'm sure that this happened in the UK, it may not have, but we went through the ABC stage, anything but Chardonnay. Yeah. And those big oaky Chardonnays sort of fell out of favour. In fact, the district's very close to Orange, down at 200 metres, and you'll see hundreds and hundreds of hectares of Chardonnay gone. But that's not happened in Orange. It's exactly the opposite. What we can produce here is, as these two guys have said exactly right, these lovely, fine, fruity. I mean, this wine, for instance, has got a lovely honey palate on it, which is what we go for off that block. We also grow Chardonnay in our higher vineyards. We have 2 vineyards and now a third we're working on. The upper vineyard's actually at 1,030 metres. So this vineyard here, where that's grown, is 780 on the old soils. The other vineyard, where we've also got Chardonnay, is at 1,030 on very deep soils. Now, strengths and weaknesses of all that. A year like we've just had, 2022, is a classic Orange year. Some of the best wines you'll ever see are going to come out of 2022 in Orange. It was a classic cold climate year. We didn't pick our reds till the end of April, which produced growth. In the May. Yeah. It had been in May. Okay, well, we were at the end of April. But, it was classic cool climate stuff. And that's where, coming back to Chardonnay, I agree strongly with what Ben is saying. Chardonnay is a defining wine for this region because we can produce these sort of Chardonnays, which are not the ABC Chardonnays. They're these classic, fine, really beautiful Burgundy-style Chardonnays. So, one of the interesting things about this is that the region itself is now, none of us, we're selling Chardonnay like we've never sold it before because it is becoming recognised that we can produce these Chardonnays. This is just a classic orange Chardonnay. It's got lovely, as I said, we shoot for that honey palate on it. It's got the classic cool climate varietals on it. And it went through the very similar process that Damien's talking about. We hand-picked it, pressed it, strained the barrel, let it naturally ferment in barrel, and we basically left it in barrel, topped it up, and cleaned it, and then fined it and filtered it, and then into the bottle. That's basically how we made it.
That's great. It's tasting really, really well today. It's quite interesting to try 19 and 21 next to each other, because obviously two very, very different vintages there.
Yeah.
It's really lovely to try those two next to each other. And I completely agree about Chardonnay being the defining white grape variety for this region as well. But I was impressed by the Italian influence as well. I saw a lot of guys making growing Gelera, making Prosecco, and I even saw some like indigenous varieties of Piedmont, like Nascetto and Timorasso in the vineyard as well. So obviously you get these very cool foggy mornings as well, and a little bit of Nebbiolo as well. And it's great. It's a place where a lot of experimentation's happening at the moment, but I think you could also.
Well, I think what allows that experimentation is the nature of the district. You've got the altitude from 600 to basically 1100, isn't it? Yeah, 1100. There's vineyards at 1100 here. Soil types are very different. You get microclimates all over the place. So it's as Damien said, it's unique in Australia. This region, there's nothing like it because of the height and the variations. And it's not, most regions of Australia are geographically planted, so you go along a road and it's this side and that side. But here, it's the height that defines it. And there are vineyards down here as far as, well, how far would Slow Wine Company be? They'd be.
Yeah, well, they're further out, but it's quite. Quite
they'd
a
be
bit higher. 50 kilometres at least in Blaney. Yeah.
So there's a vineyard in the Orange region that's 50 kilometres east of here. So it's the height that defines the region.
So to give you an idea, from one side of the region up to the top of Canobolas with the vineyards there's 6 to 8 weeks difference in when we're picking the same varieties. Within one region, you go from 30 k's away up to Canobolas when all the vineyards sitting around there, and there's 6 to 8 weeks difference. And that could be the difference from Northern Europe to Southern Europe. And we've got that within one region.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I might hand over to Ben here with these questions. We had a couple of questions here, quite chunky questions, so I might go through them as we go along, Ivan, if that's okay. So the first question is, what is the diurnal temperature range after veraison? So I guess that's asking, you get a very cool end of the season, as I experienced. What is the temperature range? Obviously, you get very, very cool nights and cool mornings.
Yeah, well, look, that depends a bit on where you are. With the altitude, where we are. So where Angullong is, we're at about 600 metres. So we're one of the lower vineyards on the southern slopes. So our nighttime, we still get those cooler nighttime temperatures where we get the cool air that comes down the hill. So the cool air off Mount Canobolas. During the evening, it starts to slide down the hill, down the mountain, and we get those cooler evenings. But our daytime temperatures are a bit higher, so we'll get into the mid 30 degree days during January, our warmest, and then we'll get down to sort of 8 to 10 degrees. That's where we are, but it's quite a different story. And that's the interesting thing about Orange. It's quite a different story when you're up in Orange. So there can be a difference of up to 6 degrees between where we are and Orange during summer. So there's quite a range. Damien would be able to tell what that would be up here.
That's pretty close. So, the Orange town itself is at 868 metres. And then you go to Canobolas, which is 15 kilometres from the Orange city. You're sitting at nearly 1,400 metres. And, the diversification of the smaller climates all through there vary considerably. So you can have a vineyard at 800 metres or a vineyard at 600 metres or up to 1,000 metres, and the variation in temperature at a given time could be up to 3 to 4 degrees.
Yeah. And I think the point Damien mentioned earlier is worth just reinforcing. Because we're high, we also get UV. Yeah. So to answer the question directly, it can get quite warm here. I remember when I first came here, that wife of mine who insisted we come and live there, I said, well, bloody cold up there. She said, we do get one 1 week a year over 30. Well, that's not true today. Climate change has changed things very significantly. So we do get warm. We do get warm Januaries, and you know that's an issue because we want to produce these fine, beautiful Chardonnays. It means you've got to have good leaf colour. You can't get phenolic build-up. You can't get sunburn and stuff like that. Then Damien picked in May. Well, if he picked in May, he was picking at 1 or 0, or just before a sleet storm came in or a snowstorm. So that's the variations. You can get pretty warm days, and you've got to really watch the UV because that can do things that you've got to protect your grapes from that. But then it can be extremely cold.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And then we've got another question which actually leads us on to our next wine. So we are going to come back to you, Ben, because we're going to jump onto your wine next. But we're going to try the Pinot Noir first from Philip Shaw Wines, which is beautiful wine. And I especially love this illustration on the back. I think Dan told me it was somebody did harvest at the winery who actually did this, and you guys liked it that much that they put it on the bottle. But the question is, which relates to this Pinot Noir is it common practice to use whole bunch press fermentation?
Look, I think that good question. I guess the answer is, you know, it's something that, you know, Daniel's been exploring for quite a while, and, you know, playing with it and understanding it. And it is a bit of a difference. You know, you've got the evolution of Dad making the wines up to around 2012, and then after that Daniel took over. So, you know, as much as there's a sameness about it, you know, growing in the same vineyards, there's difference there. But if you look over 20 years of the winemaking, there's a line that runs through them all. Pinot, number 8 Pinot, and just on the back label, the artwork there is that we believe, being, you know, predominantly single vineyard wines that come from us, is that there's a different story every year. And so through that piece of artwork, we're defining, I guess, the story of that harvest. And so an artist comes up, spends a couple of days with us, and they start with a blank sheet of paper and then hopefully with a cool bit of artwork similar to that one there. And so a whole bunch, you know, it's just one of those, I guess, levers that winemaker has to play with to create deliciousness, complexity, texture, and, you know, in spades, whole bunch, you know, does that. You know, you get flavour from the juice, from the skin, from the seeds, from the stalks, and that beautiful chewiness that it brings. And yeah, you can overplay the hand, but then that perfume or that prettiness that comes on the nose, I think it says a lot in spades in the number 8 of 19. And, you know, we've got now 8 clones of Pinot on the vineyard, and there's another variation of complexity. A lot of the old clones globally of Pinot were traditionally sparkling-based clones, and it's been the new clones in the last 50 years that have an incredible impact on vineyards across the world, but also in Australia and certainly in our vineyard. And, you know, that clonal selection off Pinnacle is incredibly important to this wine, as also is the whole bunch. But yeah,
no, it's phenomenal.
So just a quick one there. We don't hold bunch press. We go through a traditional process with our Pinot, so it goes through the crusher and then goes into the fermentation process. But the big defining factor for Pinot for us is we have one Pinot block at 750. That makes that sells very well to Australians that are converting from Shiraz to Pinot, because it's a nice big Pinot. A lot of people think it has a drop of Shiraz in it. And then we've got our other block at 10,030, 1030 metres. It makes a totally different Pinot, much more like the one that David's describing, a much finer, much more Burgundian Pinot. Both have got a place in the Australian market for sure. Our premium ones all come from up high.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so all this fruit comes from Pinnacle, which sits at 900 metres, and, you know, we keep getting into the diversity of all our backyards, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, Ben, we're going to come to you. I'm sorry it's taking so long to get to you. It's just the order of the wines.
All right.
So Ben's second generation winemaker from Angullong, and this is his first wine that we're going to be tasting here. We're going to 2018 for this Cabernet Sauvignon, and this is your top Cabernet Sauvignon, I believe. Ben, can you tell us a little bit about your estate and what you do and why you're in Orange?
Yeah, thanks, Bert. Ben Crossing, from Angullong Vineyard. So our vineyards are on the southern foothills of Mount Canobolas. So if you picture Mount Canobolas runs off reasonably quickly out into sort of flat tablelands areas, but on the mountains and into those foothills, that's where the altitude is. So we're on that fringe, but we've got about 180 hectares of vineyard there, so it's quite extensive. They were developed back in the late 90s. My grandfather established the property, not the vines, established the property back in the late 40s. They moved to the area from out west, in fact, further west, where it's really flat. And they moved to Orange for similar reasons that a lot of other people are moving here now, is the cool climate, much better conditions to live your life and also farm. So it was a traditional sheep and cattle station, and still is, but we also diversified back in the late 90s into grapes, into wine grapes. We grow a lot of grapes for other wineries as well. We've got a pretty diverse planting of grapes. You did mention about Italian grape varieties. So when our vineyard was developed back in the late 90s, we put in the main varieties that you would grow in this area, but we also put in what we were calling experimental varieties as well. They're experimental for us, obviously grown all over the world. So we put in Barbera. My parents were really interested in that was before I was really involved, and they were really interested in Italian wines, and having been in those areas, you can see some similarities in the climate for where we were going to grow those in soils and also in climate. So we put in small areas of that. So we've continued with that. We've continued to plant we call alternative varieties here now, and some of them have become mainstream. So Pinot Gris, for example, used to be alternative, but now would be called mainstream. Tempranillo, I'd say, is pretty much mainstream here in Australia now, but was experimental when we put it in. So some of those varieties have been better than others, so we've extended those plantings on some varieties. For where we are, we're slightly warmer. So we've most of our, probably 80% of our vineyard is red grapes. We grow Cabernet. A lot of Cabernet was planted in the region back in the 90s when it was established. Cool climate Cabernet was a thing that everyone was wanting to drink. I guess over time, and also grow over time, a lot of those Cabernet vineyards have been, from the higher altitudes, have been removed. There's still some in the higher altitudes, and it's really been the lower, well, what I'm calling lower, so down around that sort of 600 to 650 metres, up to 700 metres sort of area, that 600 to 750 is where most of the Cabernet is grown, I would say. Apart from, there's still some high altitude Cabernet grown. But because it's a late ripener, and Damien mentioned about the difference between picking dates. So we'll start with our early ripening whites, and there could be up to 4 weeks difference between us and when they start in the high parts of Orange. And even at the end, we might be finished 4 weeks ahead of, or 5 weeks ahead of on the reds. So having these varieties, the late ripeners, I guess you'd say, with Cabernet, things like Sangiovese, Montepulciano being late ripeners, we do that. You wouldn't, some of those varieties we've got Sagrantino down there. You wouldn't be brave enough to do it up here at sort of at 800 metres. But we're really passionate about working with the alternative varieties as well as the mainstream varieties. This Cabernet, it's grown at 600 metres. It's a 2018 vintage. It's harvested from low yielding, a dry grown block. So we talked about the soils where we are. We're verging down onto limestone soils. So where this is grown, it's right on 600 metres. You've actually got very shallow topsoils, and the roots go down into that sort of limestone soils, limestone rocks. So, and we actually have a range of wines we call Fossil Hill, and that's a nod to the natural history of the fossils that we have within the Ordovician limestone that we've got there. So that's so the Cabernet. Yeah, so it's quite a concentrated wine. I'd say there's a lot more plushness in the Cabernet that we have down where we are, but it's still cool climate style, still reasonable acidity there. It's got some dark red fruits, some dark fruits. This is our crossing reserve. So we make a few different Cabernets. This reserve Cabernet, so harvested from low yielding vines, fermented and then matured in French oak puncheons for about 12 months, and it's a barrel selection. So we go through looking for what we want to see in that reserve wine. So it sits down for a little while, let that oak integrate, and so the Cabernet here, I think it's a good expression of a cool climate Cabernet from Orange.
Fantastic.
I think, Ben, one of the things that we've learned, and I think you've led the way a lot on this, is in the early days we used to overcrop our Cabernets, and that produced a greenness in the Cabernet, which wasn't very well received. But we've learned, and Ben's also right, a lot of the higher vineyards have stopped growing Cabernet because they still get the greenness. But places like Ben's and our lower blocks, we've cut right back on our tonnages. So we'd be yielding something like a hectare, maybe 4.5 tons a hectare now, where we would have we could easily grow it at 9 tons, but we've cut it right back. And I think that's helped Cabernet and Orange immensely. So it's often compared to Margaret River Cabernets. There's a lot of similarities between the two. Now.
Yeah, sure. I love the natural acidity that you get in the finish as well. Concentration, balance. Yeah, amazing.
So you will see. In these, depending a bit on the year, the cooler years, you get a warmer year, you get more of that plushness, more of that dark fruit.
Yeah.
Cooler years, you might see a little bit of leafiness there, or a little bit of sort of herbal character.
Yep.
But still a ripe core of fruit there, which is really important to get that.
I reckon that's a great Cabernet.
So it's a lot of it's down to the viticulture and setting the vine up. So you got one bunch per shoot. There's a lot of leaf plucking goes on to the back end of vintage, especially I think it was sort of 12th to the 14th of May that we sort of got the Cabernet off, and it's what you learn every year, and it changes, and there's no winemaking by textbook up here. It's playing what's in front of you. It's so important.
Keeps you on your toes.
Definitely.
Yeah. Great. We've had a question here about cellar door. Saying our cellar door sales important route to market in Orange, and I know a lot of people from Sydney have their holidays in Orange as well. They drive up into the country because it's so beautiful, and I guess there's been a lot of investment since COVID in cellar doors as well. Is that an important part of your business for all three of the wineries as well?
I think all three of us. Yeah. It's a epic, huge part, and it not only sets up our sales through the cellar door. We're sitting in the cellar door now of the Philip Shaw cellar door, and it sets up our wholesale. Every person that walks into the three of our venues, it becomes an ambassador. They try, they're trying all the wines, and they're coming to our region. There's probably more hatted restaurants in Orange than most suburbs in Sydney. So it's not just the experience of the wineries. There's a great experience in the Orange region, and I think everyone's heard of Byron Bay, but a lot of people in Sydney sort of have gravitated to Orange as the inland part of Byron Bay, and we've been, we've been so lucky in going through the last 3 years, which we've all been shut for 8 months up here, and but Sydney and all those sort of backyards have, given us incredible support, and, long may it last. So, but, the cellar doors here have been building over the last 20 years. And, you know, it's not just been the last 3 years, it's been the 15 before that. And it's all the hard work that everyone's done. And, you know, I look forward to the great trips that I land in Heathrow, and I've got one coming up in September where we've got the ABS portfolio tasting. And it's been 3 years since I've been able to go to it. Well, it hasn't been 9, and dearly looking forward to that.
I think the other thing is that, firstly, we have a very collaborative region in terms of the winemaking team, mob. In a lot of regions, it's quite divided. It's not here. And the wine industry really led the concept of Orange being a region, which is what Damien was referring to. So people are coming to Orange, sure to go to 30 or 40 wineries, but they're also coming to Orange because it's a cultural centre and also got great restaurants, etc., etc. So to give you a little instance, the number of nights people stay here over the last 2 years has increased from 2.5 to 3.5, which is a classic example of people wanting to stick around and do some other stuff.
Fantastic. We've had a question here. Well, somebody's posted, said they used to live in Orange, and since they left, they haven't actually felt at Chilblain, which is not surprising. And then someone else who's asked, obviously because it's high altitude, it's cooler. Do you have problems with frost? And how do you manage that?
Can do. Yeah, can do. Yeah.
We've had snow on Boxing Day,
Right.
which is in the middle of summer, and I remember bringing up Tyson Stelzer from South Australia, and it was 43 degrees, and he left in shorts, and he landed at the airport here in Orange, and we picked him up, and it was snowing, and that was in March.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So how do you manage it? Vineyard location is crucial.
Yes.
So mainly in Orange, what you get in those cold periods is a southwesterly off Mount Canobbas. So if you've got your vineyard positioned the right way, the winds will go through. Most of us will have our vineyards looking like billiard board tables during that period, so the frost won't hold up. Some vineyards here have overhead water as well to prevent the frost. But from my point of view, the main thing is selection of where you are and keeping the vineyard in good shape.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, luckily we've got hills, so the cold air drains away. So you've just got to keep that, as Pete's saying, keep the grass short. Yeah. Don't even have a fence or a dam bank that's going to let it bank up. Yeah. So yeah, it's there. You know, late frosts are a risk, but they're probably not the biggest risk for us now.
Yeah, sure.
It's true. Droughts
and hail and those
droughts
sorts of
and hail, yeah, they're bloody. The climate change is a big thing in this area.
Yeah, of course, but every wine we're tasting, every one I'm tasting in Orange, just means they're also expressive of the vintage as well, and they're also different. You really get that in the glass as well. So now we're going to move on to 2019 Shiraz from Ross Hill, which we've got there. I can show you there. And I'd love to chat about this wine and in the glass straight away it's completely different, more lifted to the Hunter. It's a completely different style, very, very unique. I've not really tasted many Shirazes in this kind of style before. Could you tell us a little bit about it, please?
It's very European, I think is one way of putting it. Look, Damien said earlier that Chardonnay marks Orange, the Orange region. I think that's true. And I also think we're growing some great Shirazes as well. Shiraz would be our biggest seller, a red seller. I think that's probably true. I don't know, Damien, if that's true of you, but that's certainly...
Yeah, no, I guess ours Pinot. It's fun.
Yeah, I think Shiraz is our biggest seller.
Yeah, definitely for reds.
Yep. So it's these medium-weighted Shirazes that you've got here. This is our second level Shiraz. So this is cellar door 25 Australian. Our top Shiraz sells for 45, 50 Australian. Most of our higher level wines come from our own vineyards. This actually comes from Ben's vineyard with a little bit of Ross Hill in it. And I reckon it shows the characteristics, Ben, of being at 600 metres. Damien said 2019 was a good year. Was that 2009? I better check. Yeah, it's 2009. Yeah, it was a good year. That's true. It was.
They're all good.
Yeah. Well, I wish that was true. But anyway, it's very, so the lower vineyards have got that lovely, the real depth of Shiraz. Our Pinnacle Shiraz comes from a vineyard of about, well, maybe 730 metres, 740 metres. So it's a little bit more European style, if I can use that. A little, maybe. The big characteristic is they're not as peppery. They're much more spicy on the palate, and that's the main characteristic change that I see compared to the traditional Australian Shirazes. So they're nowhere near as heavy as the South Australian Shirazes, and you know we've all been on selling our wine in different places, and there's a traditional Australian love of the South Australian Shirazes, but that's changing. It's like Chardonnay. People are looking for these more complex wines, these bit fruitier, not so peppery in the Shiraz, a little bit more spicy, and I think that this wine's got all that.
You see a bit more white pepper in the Shiraz
Yeah.
orange than you do sort of black pepper, and it sort of comes through in this wine. And you know, when a chef, they'll use white pepper more than they'll use black pepper because, as you said, it's more that spicy sort of savouriness as opposed to a heat.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more complexity to it, and
It's interesting when we pick it. My son and I go through the vineyard with Luke, and as soon as you get that little white pepper in the Shiraz, chomp away, you know the spices are coming. And in orange, there's a trick, because particularly with Shiraz, probably with all your reds, not so much with Ben, but as soon as you get up to 700-800 metres, once it's ready to go, you pick it. Because if you get a 30 mil of rain, it's gone. It'll just drop a drop of Beaumet, and then you struggle like buggery through sleet storms to bring it back up again. So we're very careful. We go through, we look for that little bit of white pepper on the palate, and then we know the spice is coming, and next week we'll pick it. So
and Shiraz is bloody finicky.
It is.
Everyone talks about Pinot, but you get a small window and you've got to jump at it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, particularly up here.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing that combination of the fruit from the warmer site with the cooler site, because they're both doing, one's sort of the darker fruits and one's got that sort of red fruit and more acidity. But I've seen that. I mean, most of our wines, or pretty much all our wines, are a single vineyard. But over time, we've done some blending with some higher country and some from down at home, and it's really great having those different, just adding that complexity from different sites. We'll add that to it, so it's quite interesting.
That's fabulous. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's definitely more European in style, but it's definitely unique. I mean, it's almost flirting with the Pinots in style, in terms of style as well. It's definitely Syrah, but it's got those lifted, high-tone, tart red fruits coming through, which are really beautiful. A dream.
Is there a whole bunch in that?
No.
Okay.
No. We in our premium style, we fiddle with a bit of whole bunch. Yeah, but no, not in this. This is bog standard in terms of the processing. Older oak. So that Chardonnay would have had 40% new oak in it. This would have 10% new oak in it, and so we use 1 year, 2 year, maybe 3 year combination of the oak in the Shiraz tasting.
Fantastic. We've had a question here as well to all three of you. It's talking about how much, roughly, what's the split between domestic and exports? When you do export, what are the major markets outside of the UK at the moment for you guys?
For us, UK, we've been with the ABS guys for quite a while, and they're a great bunch of humans. But the northern European countries, Scandinavian countries, are great for us. And then we've just gone back into the US, since a little bit of a break after a bit more than COVID. But also Asia's really important for us, and exports would normally be about 20%.
Okay.
So with us, there's probably we fell for the China trick. So we would have had something like 20% going to China, and they just stopped like that. It was pretty interesting, actually, because we worked with two families. They were great families for 10 years, 12 years. We knew them all well, and just stopped like that. So we were going nowhere. We'd do a little bit into Germany. We've had some interesting inquiry, and James is about to go to the States. One of the big distributors in New York wants carbon neutral wine. Only wants the sell carbon neutral wine, so that's an opportunity, and we're in England now. So we're having to redo our export marketing.
Yeah, ours is pretty similar to what Pete's saying, is that, yeah, we were working with a Chinese importer and distributor and had a pretty good relationship, but obviously that just vanished. And yeah, now doing a little bit in the EU with into Germany and obviously now the UK. We have worked with some of the monopolies in Scandinavia over the years. Yeah, we're sort of trying to rebuild that export business, I guess you'd say. But domestic's been pretty strong for us all, I think. And you know, we've had some drought years and some fairly tight vintages. So I think even with China, what's happened, I think we're still in equilibrium. I don't think there've too many producers here that are trying to. We're actually all quite short of stock, unfortunately. Moving on to our vintages pretty quickly, but I think we had a pretty good 22, and I would say based on just the way things are looking for crop levels and so on, we'll get a pretty good 23. Fingers crossed.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's something that you just touched on there, Peter, as well, about your carbon neutral wines as well. You're focused on sustainability. I guess all three of you are focused on sustainability and the future and doing a bit for climate change. But can you tell us a little bit more about that as well, Peter?
Yeah, well, I think firstly it's a district thing. So there's a big push. It's a natural thing in this area that people are very conscious of, you know, the environment and doing all sorts of interesting things in the environment. Water's an issue up here. It's often the catalyst for us all. So we don't have a river running through this area. All require dam water. So you get a dry spell and you've got to start thinking about this. That's how we became carbon neutral. Yeah, funny how you fall into this. This is 8 years ago, and in the middle of the millennium drought, running out of water, and I thought to myself, we've got to find a better way of handling the world than this. And suddenly we halved our diesel costs because we halved our water usage. And then we went through a process, very methodical process, halved our tractor hours, using mowers instead of tractors. All of us are doing this sort of stuff, by the way, it's not just us. And then we went into the winery, we went right through the winery, changed fixed speed motors to variable speed motors, changed all our refrigeration practices, and put a solar farm on our first vineyard, then another solar farm up the top. End product is that we're the first winery in Australia registered carbon neutral by the Australian government. And, you know, that's the funny thing about that is we did it because we wanted to do it. It's brought enormous benefit to us. I mean, for instance, and some of it's pretty crummy. One of the biggest airlines in Australia, I won't name the name because I might get into trouble. We're selling all sorts of wine to them. Why? Because they want their input to be carbon neutral because they reckon they're carbon neutral, which I can't see how they can possibly be carbon neutral. So there's all these interesting little byproducts that have happened to us that we never, ever envisaged. Just one final one out of interest. This is now 6 years ago. At the winery, our electricity costs went from 48,000 to 8.
To 8? Wow.
8,000.
Wow.
So there you go. There's a direct benefit.
Yeah, that's enough right there, isn't it? That's incredible.
Yeah. I think sustainability too. I think because of Orange, where most of the businesses here are family businesses, agricultural businesses, and we don't have a lot of that sort of corporate short-term thinking. There's a lot of long-term thinking here. It's family succession, those sorts of things. So I think sustainability, we just think about it a lot more and are a lot more involved in that. So a lot of it, and so there is the Sustainable Wine Growing Australia program, and I think Orange is going to embrace that. We are embracing it. We've got quite a few organic vineyards in the region as well. Personally, we're in the conversion process. We've got quite a bit of our vineyard, about 30% of it's converted to organics. But I really think that sustainable wine growing, that is really there's something that we can all get involved in as a region and and I think it's got a lot more legs to it.
And it goes from the numbers, and it goes to, you know, the generations of passing things on, and you know, the more we do, you know, the better our product is, and and it sort of circles on itself. And we're seeing the presence of climate change. Most of us wrote off all our fruit from 2020 harvest because of a fire that was 160 k's away. And there's some real impacts, and the more we do, like what Peter's doing, what Ben's doing, and it comes back in spades.
It does, yeah. I think there's a concept here in this district that, it's a guardianship concept. This land, Australia's been there a long time, and the Aboriginals had it pretty right, really. They saw themselves as caretakers and guardians, and there's a strong feeling in the wine industry in Orange that that's what we are. So we've got a responsibility to leave it better than. And Ben's right, but when you've got family companies, and we're mostly all family companies, moving from one generation to the other, my grandkids don't let me get away with anything on this matter. They're very clear about it.
Yeah, great, fantastic. We had a question here from Erica, and obviously it's a challenging place to grow wine. Most places are, but obviously there's a lot of vineyard management required and a lot of hands-on time required in your vineyards because of the way and focus on quality that you all have. But do you have locals that come in, or do you have people that are traveling from Europe and doing harvest, or is it easy to find people in Orange? Because it's quite a rural place, obviously. Do you lure them in with good local food and wine and yeah?
Well, it's a mixed bag, really. It's all of that, and I think everyone, whether it's be the cafes and restaurants in London to here in Sydney and out onto our vineyards as well, is we're missing that movement of kids and human beings around the world. We have a mixture of locals, but also crews from Cambodia all over the place that come in and work on the properties in crews, and we couldn't do it without it. We do a huge amount of work by hand, and the amount of fruit, whether it be cherries and apples and everything in the area, requires that human intervention of hands, not machines, and it's massive. And COVID's upset that, so it has been a challenge without a doubt. But
yeah, it is a region that needs a lot of sort of high labour inputs. Everything's hand pruned, everything's leaf plucked and shoot thinned and crop thinned, and to more an extent up here at the higher levels, down where we are, we can get away with a little bit more. But we think we still hand prune. We don't do a lot of hand picking. We use machines, obviously, and the technology with machines now is a lot better. The selective pick process that we're seeing to get a much cleaner pick is really good. So I think we're lucky we've got that, particularly with labour getting a bit challenging over the next few years.
Great. So we're going to move to your last wine now, Ben. So this is 17.
Yeah.
So position this. So this is your Shiraz 17. So we're going to try a vintage of Shiraz as well. So can you tell us a little bit about this wine and how it is
Sorry.
as well?
So this again is another crossing reserve. Luckily, Tom and Becky from One More Wine Shop in the UK had these two wines over there. So very fortunate. So thank you to them for having those wines there for you to taste. So this Shiraz 2017, these are in our reserve range. So again, they're coming from very low yielding blocks. A lot more hand and attention to detail with those in the vineyard, as well as in the winery. And so it's, again, low yielding, probably with Shiraz, be around about 4 tonnes to the hectare. So quite low. 17 was a dry year. Again, we had a run of dry years there, but it was, I think it was quite variable too. I remember there was a bit of a cool summer there, and it can quite often happen in Orange that we might be getting some rain and some cool weather at a time when it doesn't affect the high country, because their Shiraz is still might be at around about 11 or 12 Beaumet, and we're up at 13 Beaumet, getting close to think about picking it. and then you get some rain or cool weather in it. So it is. So we do get those differences whereas the higher climate vineyards might say, oh yeah, look, we had a warmer ripening period, whereas when we were picking our Shiraz, I'm pretty sure we were rushing to get it off. But having said that, I think it shows ripeness, this wine. It's got some nice dark fruits. It was a barrel selection, so we, again, into 500 litre puncheons, French oak, and it shows some concentration there. And also that oak, I guess, is, with that time in bottle being a 17, it's integrated there, and it's certainly got some weight to it, but it still shows some of that cool climate elegance that we would typically see in orange wines. But yeah, so it's interesting seeing those two. The last Shiraz from Ross Hill, much more lifted and elegant, I guess you would say, whereas this one's probably a little bit more muscular.
Yeah. But it aged perfectly as well, and for just looking at the retail price down there, it's a lot of wine for your money for a wine that's from so much back vintage. This is 17 as well, and drinking perfectly now. So yeah, that's phenomenal. It's a treat.
Yeah, still showing some youth.
Yeah, big
there.
time.
Yeah,
and it's got that lovely natural acidity that we keep hacking on about, and which holds up in all these wines.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, gents. So that brings us to the end of the tasting. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your beautiful wines with us. Just like to wrap up. That's the end of the tasting. There's a couple of questions we didn't get to, but I'm sure we're going to follow up with those. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you've enjoyed the wines. Please go and spread the good word about Orange, and let's see orange wines on more restaurant lists by the glass. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
See
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.